Well, hello there, and welcome to an episode of Critical Weight Theory. And I do have my fan running in the background, so hopefully that's not going to disrupt because, this is a fun little TV flashback episode, an ER rewind. We're looking at episode 2 from season 1 titled Day 1. And yes, this is from ER's groundbreaking first season, which I've been watching for the first time. And it originally aired on September 22nd, 1994, and it was written by series creator Michael Crichton and directed by Mimi Leader, or Later. I don't know exactly how that's pronounced. But anyway, the pilot introduced us to the emergency room and its major characters, and day one is where the series begins to reveal what it will really become. This is not simply a show about doctors treating patients, it's about controlled chaos, impossible decisions, and ordinary people who are forced to perform under some extraordinary pressure. So the title, Day One, primarily refers to Dr. Susan Lewis's first day as a supervising resident. Until now, she's been one member of the emergency department, but suddenly she's responsible for making decisions, supervising younger doctors, and taking responsibility when things go wrong. And of course, it's an emergency room, so things are probably going to go wrong possibly every single day. So it's a dramatic shift that perfectly illustrates one of the episode's central ideas. Responsibility often arrives before we feel ready for it. And Susan quickly discovers that medical leadership involves far more than diagnosing illnesses. She has to balance these different personalities, she has to communicate effectively and make difficult judgment calls under high and constant pressure. And her conflict with psychiatrist Dr. Savetic over the treatment of an elderly patient suffering from dementia highlights how even experienced physicians can disagree about the best course of care. And it's probably one of the most memorable parts of this episode. Medicine isn't simply about knowing the right answer, it's about all these different situations where reasonable people can honestly reach different conclusions, and unfortunately, those conclusions will have consequences. And communication becomes just as important as medical knowledge. Of course, medical knowledge is important, but all of these characters have some medical knowledge. The question is, how well are you at balancing the situations? And the effective communication between doctors, nurses, patients, and families obviously leads to greater satisfaction with care in real life, but in an emergency room where every second matters, maintaining clear communication is far easier said than done. And I think this episode really conveys that very well. The staff barely has time to answer the phone, jot down notes, and move on to the next crisis before another patient arrives. And meanwhile, the rest of the emergency department never slows down either. You have Dr. Mark Green, who faces one of the episode's most emotionally challenging stories. He treats an elderly man who refuses to let go of his wife despite her do not resuscitate order, and Green finds himself caught between respecting a patient's wishes and understanding the emotional devastation of the surviving spouse. So that there are no easy answers. It's like in real life, there are just too many complex questions, and I think a medical crisis and facing mortality and all that kind of stuff, that's really at the heart of the drama here too. It's not like ER was ever going to be the easiest show to watch for everybody. It's not just mindless entertainment or whatever. And outside the trauma rooms, Green's personal life briefly intersects with his work. because his wife celebrates passing the bar exam, and the two share an intimate moment in one of the hospital's bathrooms before Green admits that he still doesn't know whether he'll ever be able to leave the hospital behind. His work isn't just a job, it's consuming his identity. And it's like one of those things, even if you're not a doctor, or even if you don't have the most important job in the world, you still sometimes kind of identify with a certain place. And I think this episode pretty successfully captures that, because Green does have incentives to leave this place, but he's sort of locked into it, it seems. And then there's Dr. Doug Ross. He continues dealing with the emotional aftermath that was shown in the pilot by visiting Carol Hathaway, who's still recovering after her attempt to take her own life. And yes, I have to avoid a certain word because of YouTube's algorithm. So thanks, YouTube. But you know what I mean. She almost ended it all. And instead of neatly wrapping up the previous episode's dramatic storyline, ER lets the emotional consequences continue. And today, that kind of serialized storytelling is common, but in 1994, it helped distinguish ER from many television dramas that reset everything by the following week. Here it's just like each episode feels like a separate part of a movie that's just like an endless movie, really. And then there's John Carter, still an eager and inexperienced medical student, trying desperately to prove that he belongs. Carter experiences both temptation and triumph during the episode. He's flirted with and even seduced by an attractive patient, creating an awkward reminder that professional boundaries can become complicated in medicine. And, I gotta say, if I was watching this as a teenager, that little bit of flirtation would have been, it would have been exciting to see. I'll just put it like that. Um, it still is a little bit exciting, for me in my 40s. But it was a little bit of a racy moment for mainstream television in the 1990s. And more importantly, Carter experiences one of the defining moments of his early career when a patient suddenly loses consciousness because of an arrhythmia. Acting on instinct and his training, Carter successfully saves the patient's life without immediate supervision. It's his first genuine victory as a doctor in training and an important milestone in his development. I'm sure that if I continue watching these episodes, I will get more of these types of moments, not just with Carter, but with other characters. They will have successful effort, and I'm sure there will be some failures down the road too. This is something that I'm still experiencing for the first time because when I was younger, I really did not watch ER. I'm sure that there were some moments on the TV while I was watching it, but it's fresh for me. And looking back years later, the actor Noah Wyle reflected on auditioning for the role by saying, "I was just trying to get the job. I had no idea it would turn into something that followed me for so many years." And it's remarkable to think that this uncertain young medical student would become one of television's most recognizable doctors and characters. It's a good show. I mean, what can you say? And Carol Hathaway remains one of the emotional centers of the episode, even though she's recovering rather than actively working in an emergency room. Her presence reminds the viewers that healthcare professionals are vulnerable human beings themselves. They spend their days helping others while sometimes quietly carrying some enormous personal pain. And I thought it was an interesting decision to have a character undergoing something like that in the very first episode. it kind of beats you over the head with it that these are flawed characters and all that. So that's one of the reasons that I like ER so far. It's not something that glorifies the medical profession exactly. I mean, it does remind you that they are kind of heroic and all that, but they're also characters who have their own problems. And so far, I haven't seen a character make what I would consider a truly bad decision. I haven't seen an evil character or anything like that, but I assume that maybe there will be some issues further down the line, like a bad decision that somebody makes, possibly for a bad reason. I don't know. Maybe this just isn't that kind of show. Maybe it maybe it would consider that too much like a cartoon villainy kind of thing. I don't know, but as far as I'm concerned, there probably are medical people like that in real life. So, well, what do I mean? There probably are. There's most certainly strong evidence that some people are bad, pretty much in any profession, and the medical profession would be no different, of course. And what are the themes in day one of ER? Well, the first is that responsibility arrives fast, and the Susan Lewis character barely has time to adjust before she's expected to function like an experienced leader. The hospital doesn't wait for confidence to develop. Patients keep arriving regardless, and they're just totally dependent on this staff. And the second theme is that medicine exists in shades of gray. Doctors rarely possess complete information. They make the best decisions they can with the evidence available, often knowing that certainty simply isn't possible. So every judgment call carries some risks, and every choice has some consequences. And another important theme is emotional continuity. Trauma doesn't disappear simply because the credits rolled on the previous episode. So Carol's recovery continues. The characters remember what happened yesterday, and those experiences influence today's decisions. And that ongoing emotional realism became one of ER's defining strengths. And perhaps most importantly, Day One establishes the visual and storytelling style that would make ER one of the most influential dramas in TV history. The camera glides through crowded hallways and long tracking shots. Conversations overlap naturally instead of waiting politely for each speaker to finish. You've got multiple storylines unfolding simultaneously, creating the feeling that life continues, whether the audience is paying attention or not. And I would say that this show does a very impressive job of balancing all of these different stories and characters. It would be pretty easy to get mixed up between these characters, but if you're paying attention, uh, you're just going to be able to follow things pretty easily. And the emergency department feels alive. This doesn't really feel fictional. You've got doctors, nurses, patients, and families constantly crossing paths, each carrying their own risks. And there's always a crisis in an emergency room. That's basically what what that environment is all about. And the result is a sense of organized chaos that few medical dramas that I've seen have really matched. Not that I've watched tons of medical dramas, but it often doesn't look quite as real as this show makes it look, either in TV or in movies. So by the end of day one, ER has truly found its identity, I would say. It's no longer introducing characters, it's showing us how people function when every shift demands impossible decisions, some relentless teamwork, and emotional resilience. So, if the pilot convinced audiences to sample the series, then day one is the episode that convinced many to stick around. It demonstrates that ER isn't simply about medicine, it's about human beings doing their best when the stakes never seem to come down. So, thanks for listening. I don't know when I will watch and review the next episode of ER. It might be a long time from now. I don't know, because this is not just a podcast series where I talk about this one show. But nevertheless, I do enjoy this show, and I can imagine that I will be back to go over some other episodes. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about any details. I did my best in terms of keeping the characters and situations correct. But also keep in mind, that I'm not a super fan. Like, I'm not that enmeshed in this world. This is all still pretty new to me, so please just try to keep that in mind. I know when you review something that people are sort of rabid fans of, they have a tendency to, be unfair and uncharitable and finger wag at you if you get something wrong and whatnot. But, I guess that's one of the risks you take when you delve into this sort of world where you look at content like this. Anyway, have a good day, like and subscribe and all that. See you in the next episode.